Now, the George Floyd protests are a turning point, so it seems, in America's reckoning with its history of racial injustice. But there is another aspect to these developments: the willingness of some other nations ruled by totalitarian regimes with even worse records of human rights abuses to use the racial unrest in the U.S. to both attack an adversarial superpower and justify their own failings. Or to quote a recent editorial, quote, "Our challenges have not gone unnoticed by our adversaries, international and domestic terrorist organizations, along with foreign state actors that are only too eager to exploit our racial and societal risks for their own benefit." Well, joining us is the author of those words, Fraser-Rahim. He is the executive director for North America, Quilliam International, and he is also a former intelligence analyst at the Department of Homeland Security. Thanks for joining us, Mohammed. I would like to just bring up a couple of tweets, first of all, from one of the countries you specifically cite in that piece, Iran. Now, this is a tweet by the supreme leader. Iran is a police officer coldly kneeling on a black man's neck and pushing until he dies while the other officers do nothing to stop this. No matter how much he pleads, is nothing new. It is the nature of the U.S. system. I wanted to ask you about Iran's, the comment, you know, what Iran is after, what it is trying to achieve in those tweets by a leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, not known for his support of human rights.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You know, the supreme leader, and particularly Iran, has been playing this tropes using race for well over a decade plus. They have been using different attitude or different means to directly target to African Americans, to looking for a sympathetic ear. This goes back to having Malcolm X on the stamp in Iran, trying to push for a broader solidarity, and also during the hostage crisis too as well, freeing African Americans as a form of solidarity. This is just their a typical effort in their playbook, strategic playbook, looking to find a new recruitment arm, a new vulnerable population in which they can potentially see a sympathetic ear, and trying to play into these tropes. And so this is no surprise, and we've seen this historically, and this is just another element that they're trying to engage, meeting with a deaf ear. But certainly there are individuals who might be sympathetic in light of the tensions that are very high all across 50 states in the U.S.
Right. Now, another country that actually you cited in that piece is China. And I want to focus on a tweet that the foreign spokesman for China put out. It was actually in response to U.S. criticism of the protests, a State Department comment about supporting the protests in Hong Kong, and the Chinese response was just to put the words, "I can't breathe." Now, here we see China basically trying to throw back to the United States, in a sense, as a defense of its own actions in Hong Kong. So I want you to just comment on that strategy by the Chinese.
The Chinese have been trying to engage in any shape or fashion to look at pressure points in the U.S., and they again have used this moment to seize or to essentially put pressure on the Americans to say that, hey, look what you're doing internally. You should address your internal matters before you address us on foreign policy issues as well. I think, again, the Chinese have their own issues, particularly dealing with various African immigrants into their countries and borders. We've seen this in light of the COVID pandemic. Many African migrants who were arriving from various African nation states who have seen discrimination, and this is very public and vocal all throughout social media and through other platforms. And so the Chinese, in many respects, are certainly hypocritical for making this statement and then seeking to win some sort of political points internally, and then also trying to have their influence, which is a broader influence operations campaign as well.
Now, it has been reported, and you cited in your piece also, disinformation, again, in some cases put out by Russia and perhaps some actors acting on its behalf. Now, I'm looking at one tweet, which was identified as a bot, which had this, I guess you call it with this hashtag, "They murdered the D.C. blackout protesters." And that was identified, D.C. blackout, as an attempt to create disinformation of some kind of massacre in Washington.
Yeah, the Russians have been using this effort going back to the Cold War, so we're used to them being aggressive, and going back to the 2016 presidential elections too as well. We know that they have been trying to meddle into our affairs, and not just the United States, but also many other Western nations. they have been using race and internal, or I should say internal discord as a means of a strategy, both in covert and also overt. And so I think that this is something that the Russians are trying to play out as we move very quickly into upcoming elections, and using this particularly racial motifs and also religious motifs as a means. I would point out too as well in that piece I highlighted that they used West African trolls, if you will, to try to see that this could in some shape or fashion relate to the obviously African-American population.
Right.
A bit of a disconnect, to say the least.
We'll have
no surprises there.
We'll have to end it here. Mohammed Fraser-Rahim, thank you for joining us on I24 News.